Hello and welcome to Beyond the Ancient World. Let the noise of the modern world fade away and step into Alexandria, where the library hums, the harbours glow, and a young princess studies philosophy by lamplight while her siblings plot succession. Tonight we follow Cleopatra VII as a living paradox, a Macedonian Greek who learned Egyptian, an ISIS queen who audited ledgers, a diplomat who turned alliances into lifelines. We'll move from exile to siege, from Caesar's protection to Antony's coalition, and finally to a tomb we've never found. Stay, and the politics beneath the legend will come into focus. Chapter 1. A City of Light and Knives. Alexandria glows by torchlight, but the palaces feel colder than the harbour wind. You move along the royal quarter, where colonnades run like measured beats, where the sea walls take the pulse of the Mediterranean and send it back through marble floors. The streets speak in Greek, the temples speak in Egyptian, and at their edge, a young princess learns when to speak and when to listen. The city sets its own curriculum. Broad boulevards laid on a grid announce a ruler's order. Yet the air carries incense from shrines older than any Greek name. The library and the Mausion, the state-supported seat of learning, hold a quiet thunder, scholars copying, classifying, arguing in close rooms, while ships unload grain by the acre. Knowledge here is not hobby, it is infrastructure. A scroll can move a tax rate, a speech can shift a harbour schedule. Step inside the palace. The walls gleam, but the rooms cool quickly. Here lineage counts as currency. A family from Macedon governs Egypt in Greek, wearing gold that claims descent from Alexander's storm. They hold ceremonies under Egyptian gods, because the Nile's priests write legitimacy into ritual. The throne sits where two systems overlap, and that overlap is a friction that never stops. You are told the rules early. Brother and sister can share a diadem and a bed. Marriage within the family keeps the bloodline visibly pure. A seal pressed again and again to prove the same message. But the same seal cracks alliances. A husband is a rival. A sister is a claimant. A banquet smiles for the guests, while letters fly at midnight to buy soldiers, scribes, and judges. The court moves faster than the law. Regents bend edicts. Tutors coach mouths as well as minds. Officials cluster like shoals, splitting and turning to avoid the net. The Greek language runs through the ledgers, the decrees, the court cases. Egyptian ritual crowns the year, sets the festivals, and binds the rural heartland to a distant house by sacred storyline. If you speak only one, you rule only half. Walk the causeways between the palace and the Mausion. Students recite lines of philosophy that sound abstract until they become policy. Rhetoric is not performance here. It is the true physical heart of the Republic that does not call itself one. A well-placed phrase can reconcile priest to a new levy. A careful metaphor can instruct a governor without shaming him. The city teaches you that words are levers, and levers move stone. The library's catalogue reaches for the world. Ships are searched for scrolls as readily as for contraband, copies made and originals kept. Court mathematicians argue about the curve of the earth while accountants tally harvest quotas, and the two streams meet in irrigation works that turn figures into bread. In this city, clear thinking keeps people alive, but luxury throws long shadows. The dynasty has trained itself to suspect, to preempt, to remove. A cousin falls ill in a convenient season. A name vanishes from inscriptions and no one admits to the chisel. The guards swear to the crown, but their paymaster sits 3 rooms away counting ships, and he has his own loyalties. Every corridor carries more than footsteps. The harbour's fog lifts and you see how exposed this throne is. Rome's merchants haggle at the quays. Ambassadors from small kingdoms wait with tribute and questions. The desert caravans arrive with incense and news. Egypt feeds cities it will never see. A grain fleet late by a week can tilt markets and moods on islands far to the west. The palace learns early to track tides measured in bread. The princess grows in this climate. She hears Greek at lessons and Egyptian in the temple precincts. The melodic cadence of hymns that crown kings. The boasts of sailors stacking wicker baskets full of barley. She sees how ceremonies and calendars anchor obedience. She studies the golden statues that call her ancestors gods, and the ledgers that reveal them as managers. And she understands the dangerous arithmetic of siblings assigned to share power. The rituals of the court turn familiar, then sharp. A procession threads between columns painted with lotus and papyrus, declaring union between the two lands. The implication is simple. The royal body stands for that union. Break the house, break the land. Keep the house whole, and the land answers when it is called. Yet the method that keeps it whole, marriage inside the family, breeds fragility. The more you double down on purity, the more you multiply rivals who are also spouses, guardians who are also competitors. At the Mausion, visiting scholars argue the meaning of a word, while royal agents weigh whether that word can justify a policy, a tax, an exception. The city teaches double sight. You learn to hear the prayer and the petition inside the same sentence. You learn to watch hands as closely as faces. You learn that silence moves faster than rumor when the stakes are high enough. Night cuts the harbour with cold. Torches flicker along the piers. The palace windows burn steady, but they offer no warmth to those not invited in. Inside, a tutor drills the modes of persuasion. Outside, priests carry an image of a god to the Nile, measuring the flood with sacred rites that double as public accounting. The layers never lift. They sit on each other and bind. This is the apprenticeship. 2 languages, 2 legal traditions, 2 calendars, 1 throne. The person who will claim it must learn to travel between them without leaving footprints. She must speak as a Greek monarch to the officials who run courts and customs, and as a daughter of Egypt to the temples that lend eternity to rule. She must honor the dead on papyrus and keep the living fed with grain inventories that do not forgive error. So the childhood becomes a workshop. Lessons in myth stand beside lists of ship maintenance. Theatre accompanies taxation. A palace child receives offerings like a deity on festival days and then spends the next morning watching a clerk allocate timber for oars. She sees the cost of mercenaries in coin and the cost of neglect in revolt. She understands that a dynasty known for sudden endings survives only by the speed of its calculations. Alexandria forges her to match itself. Cosmopolitan, because the city is a hinge of seas. Contradictory, because the court lives by blending the sacred and the practical. Trained to read a room before she read a scroll, because a misread face can shorten a reign. The palaces stay cold, but the lessons are hot to the touch. And from this city that molds her, a mind begins to master it. The torches along the harbour settle into their lines, and the boulevards fall quiet, but the rhythms remain, ready for someone who knows how to move with them and bend them when required. Chapter 2. The Education of a Queen. How does a princess become fluent in the language her ancestors ignored? You stand with her at a wooden desk lined with wax tablets and styluses, where breath fogs in the morning and the first sound is not a prayer, but a question from a tutor trained to grill princes. In this court, knowledge buys survival. Rhetoric is currency, philosophy a map, and statecraft the grammar of power. The day starts with voice. She learns how to carry meaning on cadence, how to turn a sentence so a listener nods before he understands why. Rhetoric drills the muscles you cannot see. She practices ethos, the weight of character, pathos, the clean pull on the heart, logos, the frame that makes a policy look inevitable. A young royal learns to conquer a room with grammar before she commands a regiment. Afternoon, philosophy teaches the structure beneath decision. Tutors set out dilemmas as if laying stones. Duty to ancestors against duty to the living, the claims of law against the claims of mercy. She tries on the arguments like armor, testing which plates pinch and which protect. Philosophy is not decoration here. It is a discipline for steering a ship through fog. Statecraft ties the lectures to ledgers. She traces the route of grain from delta fields to Lighthouse Harbour. She studies how a decree becomes a tax receipt, how an exemption in a border district buys quiet more cheaply than a garrison. The court prizes precision. A miscopied number ruins a village. A clean column of figures can prevent a riot. But there is a gap. Earlier, Ptolemies stayed in the language of their fathers. Greek ran the courts, the docks, the proclamations. Egypt listened and obeyed in another tongue. The rulers lived upstairs from the country they owned, hearing the footsteps but not the words. Their Greek was a palace hallway that ended at a locked door. She refuses that hallway. She learns Egyptian alongside Greek, sounds and signs shaped by 3,000 years of prayer and paperwork. She learns how a priest names a month and how a farmer jokes about the flood. She takes on more tongues as they present themselves with ambassadors and merchants. Each becomes a tool she can reach without sending for an interpreter, who might shave a meaning as he passes it along. Think of a key ring. Each language is a key to a locked room filled with a different loyalty and a different stream of information. One opens the archives where Greek scribes file contracts by the thousands. One opens the sanctuaries where Egyptian priests carry kingship in ritual and calendar. Another unlocks a ship deck where sailors complain in a coastal dialect that never seeks a court. Another fits a Roman latch where orders move on hard Latin verbs and favor travels with them. Sources ascribe 7 or 8 languages to her: Greek, Egyptian, and likely the diplomatic tongues that carry markets and military news along the Eastern Sea. The claim stands because it fits the work. You cannot run a mixed kingdom by speaking to only half of it. You cannot bargain with a legion commander through a clerk and hope the nuance survives. Her divergence carries risk. A ruler who speaks the local language hears the petitions roar. There is no cushion of translation to soften injustice, no shield of ignorance when the numbers look tidy, but the village starves. She learns the terms villagers use for a tax that bites too deep, the temple vocabulary for a rite that must not be interrupted, the slang of oarsmen who know which captains take bribes. The noise narrows to signal. The voice does the rest. Rhetoric becomes a lever. She can address priests with the right hymnic phrases and the right practical notes about repairs to a temple roof. She can meet Greek officials with the crisp cadence of decrees, leaving no room for misreadings that become convenient errors. She can meet a Roman general and speak in tones that say sovereignty without saying no, a measure that buys time in a world that punishes delay. Her presence becomes negotiation. When she enters a room, she decides which language begins the meeting, and therefore which power structure frames it. Speak Greek first, and you stand as monarch of the archive and the court. Speak Egyptian first, and you stand as the person the Nile acknowledges in sacred time. Switch midstream, and you signal a bridge, a demand, or a warning. The room reads the code. Deals start to shape themselves. Education under this roof includes listening as a skill. She learns to hear who in a conversation slows down when a certain term appears, and who pretends not to understand a term that would cost him if he admitted the meaning. She hears when a tax farmer's vows change as he lies about weights, when a priest chant adds a grace note that means the festival will slip if promised grain does not arrive. Language gives you sight where the eyes cannot go. Instructors test her with stage councils. One day she must arbitrate between a Greek guild and an Egyptian temple over harbour dues. Another day she negotiates with a visiting commander who wants supplies on credit. Each exercise ties speech to consequence. Grant too much and you drain the treasury. Grant too little and you invite defiance. The court keeps the stakes real by tracking the results in ledgers, then showing her the line where a generous phrase turned into a shortfall. She studies the letters of previous rulers, the tight coils of wording that skirted commitments, the open-handed promises that returned as chains. The lesson is simple. A sentence is a ship. If you load it poorly, it capsizes in the first storm. Balance the cargo, the honor, the concession, the clause that keeps options alive, and it carries you far past the sight of land. The practical reach is wide. With languages in hand, she can speak to priests about calendars without a middleman, to sailors about breakwaters and currents, to tax farmers about quotas and grace periods, to Roman generals about logistics that matter more than flattery. She does not wait for rumour to mutate as it travels. She asks, she hears, she decides. By the time the formal lessons taper, the key ring hangs heavy. Greek for law and philosophy, Egyptian for ritual and rural faith, others for markets, for diplomacy, for war. Each key opens a room where someone else once ruled unchallenged by ignorance. Her schooling has produced no ornaments. It has forged tools. Her education is an arsenal, not of spears, but of sentences, not of shields, but of names and dates and the right word at the right time. She can arm a policy with a phrase and disarm a rebellion with a hearing that recognizes a grievance in its native terms. The palace corridors will soon shut against her. When they do, the key she carries will still open doors. Chapter 3. Exile at the Threshold. Why does a queen-to-be find herself outside her own gates? You feel the answer in the draft that runs along the palace corridor when doors close at your approach. The seal of the boy king travels faster than the woman who shares his throne. Letters outrun footsteps. By the time you reach the antechamber, decisions already wear his name. After her father's death, Cleopatra stands beside Ptolemy XIII as co-ruler. Nominal unity, real division. The court reads the gap and moves. A trio forms around the young king: Pothinus, the household treasurer; Achilles, the commander; Theodotus, the tutor. Each holds a lever, and together they assemble a machine that runs on his signature. They do not shout her down. They slow her down until she stops. The mechanics are careful. Edicts circulate with the boy's seal, while her countersign stalls on a missing clerk. Messages to key nomes, the regional districts, arrive light by a paragraph that would have spared her face. Loyal officers receive reassignment far from the capital. Petitions once routed to her chamber take a new path, returning to petitioners stamped resolved without her seeing them. The map of Egypt tilts by inches, and power runs downhill to a different desk. You watch the ground in Alexandria turn to glass under your feet. Enforcers crowd the threshold and explain that protocol has changed. Courtiers, who smiled in the library corridor now keep their eyes on the floor. The treasurer audits her gift to temples and finds a regulation that obliges their return. The general blocks her access to garrisons with a rule about the king's safety. The tutor cautions the boy about his sister's ambition. It is not a purge. It is a narrowing hallway. She withdraws before they can lock the door behind her. Not far, yet far enough, that the fountain whispers of the palace cannot be heard. She holds what a ruler can carry by hand. Allegiance from a few officials whose careers depend on her return. Knowledge of the grain cycle, and the habit of seeing options where rooms look empty. Exile sits at the edge of her own country, where the desert wind warms the bones, and the city lights glitter like a promise that refuses to pay out. Resourcefulness becomes routine. She summons loyalists not by proclamation but by memory. A clerk who once corrected a ledger for her appears with copies of ship rosters. A temple steward, treated with respect in past audits, sends word about which priest will back her if the calendar stays funded. An officer sidelined to a provincial post rides in with a handful of veterans. She builds not an army, but a hinge. The door she wants to swing is Roman. Across the sea, the chessboard does not wait. Rome's civil wars spill into the open like floodwaters breaking a bank. Caesar and Pompey pull provinces into their wake. Messages arrive out of breath. A defeat in Greece, a flight across the water, a request for refuge at Egypt's court. She reads the rush not as mere news, but as current. Egypt will float or sink on it. A line unwisely, and the Nile itself cannot wash the stain. The advisors around Ptolemy XIII strike first to impress the incoming tide. Pompey reaches the Egyptian coast and does not survive the shore. The act is meant as a gift. It lands as a catastrophe. Julius Caesar follows the trail into Alexandria and finds a murder performed under the Egyptian sun. The equilibrium shatters. The capital fills with soldiers who speak judgment as easily as they speak commands. Here is the opening, narrow and sharp. Caesar is in the city, angry but calculating. He recognizes kings and unmakes them. Recognition is the currency Cleopatra needs. She has the claim, the education, the allies waiting for a signal. She does not have the door key to the audience that will decide if her exile becomes a reign again. The risk is simple. To reach Caesar, she must cross a city where the men who engineered her removal now control the guards. The palace is a net. Every corridor is a witness. But she is trained for rooms like this, only larger. She reduces the palace to a single objective, his ear. She narrows her body to what can pass unnoticed. The tale survives in competing versions, but the logic is constant. She gains access not as a guest, but as cargo. Whether rug or sack, the vehicle is the same. A container that tells the guard his job is to deliver, not to inspect. Porters carry her through gates that would close if she walked them. The fabric unrolls or the cord loosens, and the person the city tried to mute stands exactly where the conversation starts. This is not a gesture of romance. It is leverage constructed from timing, nerve, and the practiced use of theatre when theatre serves policy. She arrives as a problem solver in a room suddenly full of problems. A dead Roman magnate, a rattled population, a boy king steered by hard hands, and a grain supply that matters to the republic that claims to rule the world. She speaks to the man who can balance those weights and asks him to add one more. You can feel the temperature shift. Her presence reframes the conflict. No longer sister against brother in a sealed court. Now claimant against a faction, under the eye of Rome's most dangerous arbiter. Caesar must calculate, back the party that misread him, or back the one who offers order, grain, and a performance of legitimacy that the priesthood can bless on the calendar. Support does not arrive as a trumpet blast. It arrives as a hearing, a promise of adjudication, a guard detachment that treats her as someone not to be put out. Her enemies scramble to harden their positions. The city tightens. Streets become checkpoints. Whispers spread about troops at the docks and fires that start too easily near warehouses. The palace is no longer a net. It is a fortress about to be tested. The mini payoff sits in the way she crossed the threshold. The smuggled entrance, rug, sack, or something even plainer, works because it expresses the method she learned in Alexandria. Turn forms to function, use ritual as tool, collapse distance with language and nerve. The result is access, and access becomes momentum. The door is open. The siege begins. Chapter 4. Siege and Settlement. How does a civil quarrel become a Roman war on Egyptian streets? You feel it in the hum of the harbours turning to a grind of oars, in the quick march of unfamiliar boots across mosaic floors, in the way a private feud gains banners and legions once Rome stares at it. Caesar anchors in Alexandria, and Cleopatra claims the throne not by thunder, but by argument and presence. Words become deployments. The city begins to burn by inches. The palace hardens into a command post. Caesar's escort is narrow, more staff than army, enough to enforce a judgment if no one contests it, not enough to stare down a mobilized capital. His authority is weighty, but his numbers are thin. He orders messages along the coast for reinforcements, knowing that the sea is both highway and hazard, and that delay is a weapon his enemies will gladly use. The factions answer quickly. The boy king's circle moves soldiers to choke points, seizes arsenals, and drags ships into position like gates across water. Alexandria, a city meant for trade and study, turns its geometry toward war. Streets designed for processions become funnels for infantry. Warehouses with grain for export become redoubts. Harbours that welcome the world become traps that can starve it. Cleopatra stands beside Caesar and builds the case that matters: legitimacy. To him, she frames succession as a Roman question of law and treaty, a continuity that stabilizes grain supply and quiets a frontier his enemies would gladly inflame. To Alexandrians, she states a restoration of order that protects their markets and their pride. To the priestly establishment, she presents calendar and rite, the sacred timing that gives reigns their seal. Each audience hears what sovereignty looks like in its language. The siege erupts, and the city becomes a theatre of fire. Skirmishes break into alleys like sudden weather. The docks fill with hulls nose to stern, ropes creaking, men shouting in a dozen accents. The library quarter's fate hangs in rumour. Storerooms lit by accident or design. Sparks whipped by wind along roofs of cedar and pitch. Loss travels faster than confirmation in a crowded city under arms. Caesar holds the royal district, but barely. He stretches his small force along walls and gates, choosing points that let him control the harbours and keep his line of retreat onto water. He watches the shipyards and the lighthouse island, knowing that whoever commands the harbour mouth commands the food and the future. He sends again for help. He knows he must last long enough to change the math. Every day is arithmetic. How many sailors can man the ships and still guard the piers? How many archers at the causeway, and how many carpenters to keep engines working? How many envoys to send and to whom? Across this arithmetic, Cleopatra works the other columns. letters to provincial officials who still read her name with loyalty, assurances to temples that festivals will not break, promises to guilds that their dues will hold steady once the streets are theirs again. Policy continues under fire. Egypt sits at the fulcrum of Roman survival. Grain fleets turn hunger into politics, and politics into war. Control the granaries and the harbours, and you hold a lever that can move a republic whether it admits it or not. Caesar knows this. So do his enemies. That is why they crowd Alexandria, rather than wait for the desert to do their work. That is why he refuses to sail away and concede the hinge that keeps Rome fed. Weeks stretch. Fighting surges and recedes like the sea against the quay. Fires scorch corners of the city. Accounts later disagree on what burned and for how long, but no one disputes the price. You hear it in the voices that count losses without tears because there is no time. The point is not to mourn. The point is to end the question of who rules. Then the wind shifts in a practical way. Reinforcements arrive along the coast. Ships loom at dawn with men who step ashore already organized, already drilled to the rhythm of Caesar's orders. The calculus changes. The thin line at the palace thickens. The garrisons that tried to bottle him now worry about being bottled themselves. Paths that were cut reopen. The harbour mouth breathes again. Pressure moves outward from the royal quarter through the streets to the edges of the city. A clash near the Nile becomes decisive. Ptolemy Thene's position collapses in motion rather than ceremony, and the boy king is swept toward the river and lost to it. The fight, so loud and public, resolves in water that does not argue. Cleopatra's enemies fade with their patron, leaving gaps where commands used to be. The city exhales with smoke. The damage is real. Piers blackened, homes and shops gutted, archives and storerooms with losses no one will tally cleanly. The library quarter's wounds become a riddle that later ages will worry over. But the living fact is political. A verdict delivered not in marble, but in streets won and held. Cleopatra is restored, not as a dependent hovering at the edge of Roman grace, but as a ruler who has argued her case across the city's 5 senses and backed it with the realities that keep a kingdom standing. The co-rulership is reshaped on her terms. Her younger brother placed beside her as convention demands. Her hand, the one that signs and summons. The priesthood confirms in ritual what soldiers have enforced in fact. The harbours reopen to the traffic that feeds both Egypt and Rome. Settlement follows siege. Accounts are set. Arrears are calculated and remitted where it binds loyalty. Officers are confirmed or quietly replaced. Shipyards return to craft rather than barricade. Grain moves again in measured flows that soothe markets far away. The city scars dry in the sun, and the court rehearses the words that turn recent violence into lawful succession. And yet a throne reclaimed is not a kingdom secured. War can crown a claimant for a season, but governance holds a country through famine, flood, and rumour. The next test will not arrive wearing armour. It will arrive as numbers, as prayers, as the steady pressure of daily need, asking for decisions that outlast the sound of marching feet. Chapter 5. The Quiet Architecture of Power. What does survival look like when the drums stop? You stand in a council chamber where the torches burn steady, and the only marching is of numbers across a wax tablet. The air smells like oil, ink, and grain dust. A queen returns to the machinery that keeps breath in a city. Taxation, storage, transport, and law spoken in clear terms that bind. With the throne stabilized, Cleopatra turns inward. She studies the routes from delta fields to lighthouse harbours, the choke points where theft and delay eat the margin that prevents hunger. She does not issue a grand decree and walk away. She follows the paper trail, and she makes others do the same. Egypt's wealth is famous, but wealth can rot from within. Famine years and corruption pry apart the social contract like a bad wedge under a door. Her administrative adjustments start with oversight. Inspectors count grain not as myth, but as weight. Scales are tested, seals are tracked. A shipment that leaves a nome must match what arrives at the quay, and the clerk who signs for it must answer when the figures disagree. Offices once treated like prizes turn into responsibilities with hours and audits. Loyalty is measured in the ability to deliver on time, but oversight alone cuts bluntly. She calibrates. Some burdens ease by design, not charity. Targeted exemptions keep key regions steady when the flood runs low. Guilds that arm the economy, shipwrights, millers, porters, receive remissions tied to output and reliability. The message is simple. Meet the quota and the crown carries a share of the load. Fail and the exemptions close like a fist. Policy speaks the language of persuasion. Law follows the grain. Courts hear disputes over transport contracts, storage rights, and taxes owed under drought. Rulings are crisp. A temple with state granaries must keep its doors open during shortage and will be credited later. A tax farmer who pads his tallies loses the post and faces recovery suits. The system moves from favour to function, not perfectly, but enough that delay stops being profitable. She tends the image that allows reform to stand. In Greek, she rules as a monarch steeped in philosophy and precedent, issuing edicts with clean logic and enforceable clauses. In Egyptian, she embodies Isis, the mother and protector who keeps balance, whose rites confirm the season and bless the crowd. Processions reinforce that language. When she appears crowned with horns and disc, the reform that trimmed a levee for canals becomes a sacred duty to guard the flood. Ritual validates policy. The tension never relaxes. Famine years come like hard seasons in a long marriage. Storage fills and empties, and the state must decide who eats first without tearing itself open. She moves grain to cities that cannot feed themselves and to garrisons that keep order. She releases reserves to stabilize prices, then shores up the loss with tighter accounts the following year. A bad harvest becomes a test of nerve and arithmetic. An example shows the method. A river district that maintains critical levees receives remission on arrears after high water damages fields. The remission is public and conditional. Repair crews first, then relief. The levies hold the next season, and the remission becomes a contract in the minds of those who worked under it. It is not generosity. It is a purchase of stability at a discount. Finance underpins everything. Ships are maintained rather than replaced, because hulls that arrive late are as costly as ships that never sail. Harbours are dredged so grain drafts do not ground when the water runs shallow. Warehouses are inspected for damp rot and patched before losses compound. Clerks are held to account. A signature is a promise, and a false promise become grounds for removal. The small acts add up. The sea does not care about intentions. It answers to maintenance. You sense how the ledgers turn into quiet strength. Each entry is a soldier without a spear, holding a line that no banner can mark. A remitted fee keeps a crew loyal through winter. A corrected weight prevents a riot at a bakery next month. A well-timed shipment to an inland town stops a governor from overreaching when hunger would have made him bold. The army that matters most in these years marches on parchment. Cleopatra balances two calendars. The Greek court calendar sets deadlines and payments. The Egyptian sacred year crowns time with festivals that must not fail. She funds the rites, not as ornament, but as anchor. Temples receive allocations to maintain processions that reassure villages the world is in order. In return, priests recognize decrees and name her in prayers as the guarantor of Maat. Order, justice, the fit alignment of things. The prayer and the policy meet in the same ledger. Corruption fights back. It hides in the space between decree and execution. She shrinks that space. Officials rotate through posts to break networks that skim. Reports cross-check. A prefect who claims a loss at sea must show weather records, patrol logs, and the salvage list. She does not chase every thief. She removes the profit from theft until honest work pays better for men who want to sleep. Revenue flows stabilize not by squeezing, but by predictability. Merchants learn that dues will not change mid-voyage. Farmers learn the rate and plan, sowing accordingly. The crown earns more by being knowable than by being feared. When the time comes to ask for more, repairs after a flood, outfitting ships for a season of danger, the request lands on ground that hasn't been churned into mud by panic. This is survival without drums. Decisions made at a desk hold back chaos far from the palace. Grain moves, courts function, rites proceed, ships return, and the city breathes. Rome convulses beyond the horizon with assassinations and decrees that leak power like water from a cracked amphora. Egypt remains solvent and cohesive because someone keeps counting and keeps her word. You stand again in the council chamber. The torches burn lower, the tablets stack. A queen signs the last order of the day with the same pressure she used to sign the first. Solvency is leverage. Leverage attracts allies and enemies, and the sea will bring both to her door. Chapter 6. Caesar's Shadow. Why does the world's most powerful Roman see value in a queen at the Nile's mouth? Because survival in his world needs grain, ships, and an image of dominion that reaches beyond Italy. And because survival in hers needs recognition, protection, and a Roman who can turn her throne from a claim into a fact that no general dares to revise at sword point. The exchange is blunt. He brings authority that bites. She brings the means to feed a restless republic, and the stage on which that authority can perform. We step onto the river. The voyage on the Nile is a moving summit, part festival, part audit. Barges stitch the water like a procession of policy. Music, banners, and trained precision cloak the negotiations that matter. Tribute calibrated to Rome's hunger. Security mapped as garrisons and harbour control. Succession framed so the priesthood and the street both understand who stands next. The displays are not distraction. They are signals. A queen who can marshal spectacle can marshal tax and transport. A Roman who can stand beside her looks larger when Rome is watching. The terms develop in the language she chooses. Greek, when the subject is treaty form and legal memory. Egyptian, when the subject is ritual time and the calendar that crowns her as the guarantor of order. Latin, when the man she addresses counts legions more than festivals. Each shift in tongue resets the frame of power. Each stop along the river confirms that the crown reaches out across gnomes and granaries and calls back an answer. Policy sits on cushions and speaks in measured tones. He needs ships ready to move with the season, hulls that will not rot at the quay. He needs grain where his enemies cannot cut it, with clerks who match tallies and captains who keep schedules. He needs a companion figure who makes conquest look like partnership, because the Republic still pretends that Rome does not bow to kings. She needs his signature on her reign. She needs his guard at her door when factions test the hinges. She needs his public presence to silence those who trade in rumor and knives. The river carries a further message. An heir, Caesarion, is born, and with him arrives a symbol sharp enough to draw blood in Rome. The child links a Macedonian Greek dynasty to the man whose name weighs more than law. No legend is required. The fact, presented alongside pageant and careful words, says succession might now speak two dialects of power. It tells the priesthood that the line continues. It whispers to Roman audiences that the Nile has tied itself to their leader by more than grain. Mutual benefit settles onto a scale. On one pan, Egypt's harvest, fleet, and ceremonial legitimacy. On the other, Rome's muscle, prestige, and the right to judge kings. Each adds weight to the other's side until the beam finds a still point. When his enemies accuse him of grasping for a crown, he can point to a sovereign who chose him in state, at sea, under the open sun. When her enemies accuse her of weakness, she can point to a Roman ruler who sits at her oars and asks the river to carry them both. But the current runs through a city that eats its own. Roman politics are volatile, and every alliance draws fire. Standing with him paints a target. Whispers swell, pamphlets circulate, gestures harden into attacks shaped as jokes that travel farther than speeches. A queen at Rome's edge becomes a figure in someone else's argument about the Republic's soul. The gain in security arrives with a shadow. The shadow grows when he acknowledges her in public. Appearances, invitations, and a child whose presence demands explanation all draw eyes. The gesture lifts her stature and sets rival mouths moving, because honor given to a foreign monarch can look like an insult to a Senate that still insists it governs. She becomes a point on which enemies pry at Caesar's image. She also becomes the person whose name can steady a frontier when it is time to ship out the harvest. On the Nile, the spectacle continues with exact timing. At one bend, priests step aboard and speak in the slow, certain phrases that align reign with ritual. At another, officials lay out ledgers, and she talks shipping windows and arrears without softening the numbers. He measures the machinery and sees its discipline. She shows him that a policy written in two scripts reaches farther than a decree shouted in one. The voyage becomes a map of power applied. You can feel the calculation tighten. Each public gesture is weighed. How far to go, how much to show, which ceremonies to share and which to keep within Egyptian walls. He must appear magnanimous without looking monarchic. She must appear sovereign without looking Roman-made. The edges blur by design. The performance creates space in which both can move. The arrangement reaches Rome as a murmur that refuses to die. Criticism finds a face and a tone. It lives in letters, in forums, in the way rivals widen their eyes when her name appears. The complaint is clear. Rome should not be seen bowing to a queen. Yet the same voices know that hunger bows everyone sooner or later. Grain answers some arguments that words cannot. When the scale finally steadies, it does so because each side holds. He keeps his armies fed and his image burnished by the light of an ancient crown. She keeps her throne recognized and guarded by the most dangerous patron alive. The alliance is not warmth. It is a contract signed in public, renewed by movement up and down a river that remembers gods. Then the knife edge. A forum erupts. The man who made and unmade kings falls to blades, and the arrangement breaks mid-sentence. No decree, no farewell, no stage transition. Only a vacuum. For a queen who built her leverage on the surety of one Roman, The floor tilts. The question returns. Who now decides what counts as rightful rule? And how soon will they arrive at the harbour mouth? She absorbs the shock by standing on what she built. The grain moves. The ships hold. The priesthood continues the calendar. Her court speaks with coherence while Rome splinters into factions that claim the dead man's mantle. The recognition she needs does not vanish. It fragments and must be sought again under new banners and new terms. Her position survives because it rests on more than presence at his side. It rests on administration that endures a change of patron. The world redraws itself. 3 men carve provinces into responsibilities. The Mediterranean acquires borders that run through alliances as much as through land. Egypt cannot stand apart from this arithmetic. It must choose a partner who can hold the line where river meets sea. The triumvirs divide the world. Cleopatra must select the right half. Chapter 7. An Eastern Coalition. When Rome fractures again, which alliance can keep Egypt whole? You feel the shift in the air as couriers ride harder, and messengers learn to speak without taking a breath. The continent is cut into jurisdictions, claims, and tempers. A queen must pick a gate that will not swing shut on her. The man holding the east arrives with a ledger in one hand and a sword in the other. Enter Mark Antony, master of the eastern half, charged with raising money, moving legions, and keeping a turbulent frontier steady. He needs resources that do not vanish when rumors turn ugly. He needs fleets that sail on time and administrators who can count without lying. In Alexandria, he finds a state that keeps its books and a ruler who can make a policy walk from a decree to a dock. He asks for stability. She asks for recognition that fixes her borders with Rome's stamp. The tension is immediate. Octavian consolidates the West and sharpens a narrative that cuts without drawing blood. A propaganda war ignites. Every banquet becomes a briefing where seating plans telegraph rank and intent. Every dispatch reads like a theatre bill. Even coins turn into messengers. The room you dine in and the metal you spend both tell you where power intends to stand next. The political economy between Antony and Cleopatra runs on exchange, not sentiment. She brings wealth, ships, and the administrative backbone that keeps a campaign fed. He grants territories and official standing, converting leverage into legitimacy. Egypt's treasuries can float a season of war. Its harbours can shelter a fleet. In return, he takes out a public insurance policy on her throne, signing it with assignments of land that widen her margin of safety. The agreements do not live only on paper. Coins appear with paired profiles, his then hers, public contracts carved into metal and passed hand to hand. The image says partnership. It says joint authority. It says that the Nile's queen and Rome's eastern commander share a program that will not be hidden behind palace doors. In a world where literacy is uneven, the coin is a courier who never tires. Territory follows imagery. Grants restore reach long lost by her house. Cyprus returns to her sphere, a forward base in the sea lanes that matter. Parts of Syria and Cilicia attached to her rule, a ladder of coasts and ports that stitches Egypt to the Levant. Buffer becomes policy. Each added district extends depth, giving raiders more ground to cross and giving her governors time to warn, respond, and tax with coherence. The additions carry logic you can feel on a map. Cyprus anchors shipyards and watchposts. Syrian towns become waypoints for supply lines that feed eastern legions. Coastal holdings let Alexandria's harbour speak to allied ports without asking permission from unfriendly customs. The result is reach. Egypt's voice travels farther, and its silence, when chosen, can hurt. Ceremony keeps pace with statecraft. Antony leans into the language of Dionysus, the god of triumphal processions and liberating abundance. Cleopatra stands as Isis, the guardian and restorer who binds a kingdom to order. The pairing is not costume. It synchronizes myth with policy, explaining to audiences across languages that two rulers meet under divine models with complementary duties: conquer and provide, defend and renew. Processions, inscriptions, and staged appearances make the claim legible from palaces to marketplaces. Octavian answers with a campaign of his own. He frames the Eastern alliance as a betrayal of Roman measure, a foreign softness in stern armour. The message floods forums and mess halls. Yet while words travel, so does grain. Antony and Cleopatra hold the ports that hold the bread, and banners do not feed cities. Propaganda wounds, but logistics decide which wounds turn fatal. Inside the alliance, work is granular. She standardizes dues along contested corridors so goods can move without constant haggling. He coordinates staging grounds for a Parthian front and expects provisions to arrive by a schedule, not by hope. Her scribes match tallies with his quartermasters. His envoys confirm that commitments made in Alexandria become real at Antioch, at Sidon, at Cyprus's harbours. The machinery pulses. The levy becomes a column of numbers and then a column of men. Coins keep talking. New issues show paired titles. The metal does more than honour. It fixes accountability. If the alliance fails to protect roots, the failure is stamped on something you hold. If it succeeds, the proof clinks in your purse when prices stay steady and soldiers are paid on time. A small daily referendum circulates through hands that never see the inside of a council chamber. Territorial donations bring their own risks. Every grant dents someone else's expectation. Local elites must be wooed or replaced. Governors serve at a queen's pleasure yet answer to a Roman who expects discipline. Letters cross borders carrying schedules for tax remittance and demands for repairs to fortifications that look modest until you price the stone and labour. The alliance learns to carry contradiction inside its ribs and keep moving. The ports along the Levant turn into a spine. Alexandria contracts out wheat at harvest and anchors convoys at season changes. Cyprus stages timber and pitch. Syrian towns supply mules, leather and grain when the Nile's flow dictates other priorities. The Eastern Sea begins to feel governed by a single plan. And that plan has two signatures. Banquets keep their double life. Ambassadors dine, and the table becomes a chart. Which city gets remissions after a hard season? Which harbour needs dredging to keep deep draft ships from grounding? Which client king will be asked to contribute soldiers, and how he will be repaid without breeding resentment? Every toast masks a negotiation. Every song covers the sound of calculations in the next room. The mythic pairing continues to do public work. When Antony appears as a new Dionysus in procession, it reads as license to distribute bounty and to wage campaign with divine sanction. When Cleopatra appears as Isis, it reads as the promise that the cycle will hold, that floods will come, that law will keep balance. In the overlap, subjects hear a simple pledge. The realm will feed you and protect you. For a few tight years, the balance of the Mediterranean tilts east. Ships sail under friendly orders. Tax receipts arrive with less noise. Armies in the east find their pay chests filled on time more often than not. Markets calm because corridors stay open. The coalition looks like a government, not a romance. And in its shadow, Octavian's rhetoric strains to keep pace with the facts on the water. Yet the horizon is not quiet. Octavian continues to gather allies and shape stories that wear away reputations like waves against stone. The East cannot live by coin and ceremony alone. It must master the wind and the choke points where fleets can be trapped and starved. Strategy shifts from ledgers to sails, from embossed profiles to prow rams and signal fires. The joint project stands, a counterweight to the West, anchored by Egypt's grain and the Levant's ports, hardened by shared interest and daily coordination. It is strong. It is also exposed to a single hard question posed by the sea. But the sea asks for a reckoning. Sails gather at Actium. Chapter 8. Actium. The wind turns. How does a fleet lose when its commanders control the richest waters of the East? You stand on a deck that barely moves, the sea holding its breath. The harbours behind you are full of grain and timber. The treasuries are heavy, and yet the horizon belongs to someone else. The paradox bites hardest when the wind dies, and patience, not muscle, decides a campaign. The setup is a calculation written in hulls and currents. Antony and Cleopatra field heavier ships, stout king creams with tall sides and rams that smash when they find purchase. Opposing them is Agrippa, a commander who uses time like a weapon and prefers to cut lines rather than charge walls. Octavian waits with discipline, content to let scarcity and rumour sail ahead of his banners. The Ionian water narrows the choices. The coastline is a series of hooks. Anchor in the wrong cove, and you eat rot and doubt. Disease creeps through cramped decks. Desertion flickers at the edges, a few men at a time. Then more as pay arrives late and hope arrives later. Supply lines fray. Agrippa nicks arteries along the coast. Ports that should have fed the coalition now hesitate or close. And messages start using softer verbs to describe hard failures. Food runs short. Fresh water comes with risk. A fleet is a city that must eat, and a hungry city listens to whoever offers bread. The strategic choke points tighten the noose. The Ionian Sea pushes north and curls back. Currents that make holding position a task as hard as fighting. A blockade does not need a wall when the water itself is a fence. Heavier ships strain against the drift and exhaust crews before oars bite. Every attempt to slip the cordon burns stores. Every delay costs sails and patience. The quinquirims carry strength like armour, but wear it like weight, paying for power with speed. Command dilemmas rise with the heat. Fight now to break the net, or wait and preserve the core for another season. Engage, and you risk losing the very hulls that make you formidable. Hold back, and disease and defection do the work you refuse to do to yourself. Each counsel weighs honour against survival, and each hour on an anchor chain shortens both choices. The map argues for action. The ledgers beg for delay. Signals become a language that lies by accident. Flags go up and flicker in the glare. Orders move from flagship to wing and turn thin as they travel. Captains trim to safety when the message blurs, promising themselves they will be brave tomorrow if they can be cautious today. A few slip away on the reliable wind of self-preservation. The veterans notice. Confidence thins. A fleet that wonders about itself is already taking on water. Cleopatra's squadron is the one force with fuel to move, and the treasure that keeps campaigns alive. The breakout is not flight in the animal sense. It is a rational gambit to save the command nucleus, the treasury, and the administrative brain that makes another season possible. If the line breaks cleanly, you salvage what matters and force a chase on your terms. A coalition that loses its money and its clerks loses its future. Sometimes you spare the fabric rather than let the whole garment burn. Agrippa, trained for attrition, reads the plan in the smoke before the sails fill. He keeps pressure on the exits, not by reckless pursuit, but by making the choice to leave look like abandonment. He starves the confidence that keeps an oar team together. He cuts the small ties, harbours, fords, town councils, that allow a fleet to breathe in a foreign sea. When a commander must pick between two bad horizons, the horizon you control wins. The fight near Actium is movement as much as collision. Heavy hulls turn slowly. Lighter ships nip and fade. Currents shove formations out of shape, and the work of pulling them back costs time you cannot buy twice. Oars churn to hold station while archers wait for a deck to come close enough to matter. The sea is crowded with purpose and doubt. You hear the rhythm fail, a missed beat that spreads like a bruise. The breakout begins with a clear signal from Cleopatra's line. Sails rise, oars dig. The vector angles out of the grid of opposing ships. It looks like strategy if you see the columns of numbers that must survive into winter. It looks like desertion if you see only the immediate fight. Both views exist on the same water. Antony turns to follow because the command center is moving and the plan has shifted to preservation. In the pivot, coherence loosens. Fog of war turns to weather. Two formations try to become one withdrawal. Some captains who owe pay and fear censure haul away without waiting for an order that might compromise them. Others, loyal but tired, miss red flags in the glare and lock oars when they should run. A handful, seeing the tilt, switch sides to the admiral who offers certainty. Once doubts multiply, you cannot count them. The burden of heavy quinqueremes becomes a sentence. They cannot sprint. They cannot maneuver in tight water with the same ease as lighter hulls. Their strength lies in close combat, but the conditions will not deliver the enemy's ribs to their rams on schedule. They carry towers, engines, and pride. Pride does not pull a ship off a lee shore. Octavian's patience becomes a blade without blood. He lets the narrative of flight right itself, while Agrippa maintains shape and denies a clean escape to those still lingering. The Eastern fleet loses officers and cohesion faster than it loses timber. The psychological breach widens, and morale, once counted as a constant, becomes a subtraction on every page. Reputation drowns faster than ships. By afternoon, the outcome has weight. The coalition has not been slaughtered. It has been unstrung. Hulls survive, but the instrument that made them a force no longer plays in time. The treasury and the core escape downwave, but the cost is authority. Allies, who had wagered on a rising east, start counting the weeks until they must answer to the west. This is the mini payoff. The East loses the initiative, not destiny, logistics and command coherence. The fleet that could feed itself cannot supply itself under a blockade. The commanders who could plan cannot keep a dozen minds moving as one in hostile water. The battle writes down their credit and writes up their opponent's discipline. And the sea converts defeat into landfall. Without mastery of these waters, the coast becomes a chain, not a corridor. Garrisons that counted on grain wait for ships that do not appear. Governors hear two versions of the future and choose the one with the nearer deadline. The coalition collapses not in a single act, but in a series of refusals to align. Defeat at sea becomes collapse on land. Alexandria stands alone. Chapter 9. Alexandria's last season. What does the end of a dynasty sound like inside marble halls? You hear sandals on stone, counted and calm. You hear couriers asked to wait outside while a clerk finishes a line of figures. You hear shutters close against dust blown in from the quay. The city knows the ending before the palace speaks it aloud. After Actium, Octavian advances in measured steps, taking islands, ports, and loyalties, as if crossing a series of deliberate stones. Reports arrive like slow knives. Governors who once toasted the Eastern Coalition now send trim letters that avoid verbs of promise. Antony's command unravels in pieces, detachments that drift, captains who ask for pay you cannot send, officers who practice obsequy in two directions and hope one will survive. Cleopatra keeps a separate cadence. She moves her council from display to detail, from theatre to salvage. The aim is narrow but real. Secure succession if possible, extract concessions where leverage remains, or, failing both, decide the terms of the last act. Negotiations begin before envoys are named. Gifts are inventoried not for show but for conversion, a last currency to purchase mercy for children. She sends word that acknowledges the balance of power without conceding the identity of the crown. The language is deliberate. It offers compliance in logistics, not in sovereignty. Octavian reads the lines and prepares his answer by marching closer. Alexandria lives under strain. Warehouses are opened and counted with a care that sounds like prayer. Scribes call weights, and assistants repeat them. Shipyards tally hulls that can still take the sea. Harbour masters stack tablets listing crews, oars, sailcloth, and stores. Temple treasuries are assessed for a final levy, their guardians quiet in the knowledge that ritual and revenue are inseparable at the edge of conquest. The city runs like a machine that knows it will be disassembled, but refuses to fail while it still turns. Inside, Antony's staff thins into a rumour. Orders return unsigned. Messages travel and do not return. He summons and finds fewer faces than chairs. Battle rank dissolves into private panic. He makes plans, breaks them, makes new ones with less reach. The centre that once held campaigns together now trembles at each knock on the door. Cleopatra's calculus is colder. She preserves ledgers, moves archives, clears corridors, and sends for tutors to teach children the speech they may need in a different court. She seeks terms that will preserve Egypt's autonomy in fact, if not in slogan. The offers are practical. Grain on a timetable, access to harbours without resistance, neutral treatment of allied merchants. In exchange, space for succession. If Octavian will name a path for the children, if he will mark borders that remain under Egyptian law, she will instruct the city to stand down. It is a hard bargain to ask of a man who wants to rule alone. Beyond the walls, a story spreads that prepares the ground for annexation. Octavian's propaganda frames her as a foreign queen who seduced a Roman into disloyalty, a narrative designed to make conquest feel like restoration. Markets repeated in shortened form. Mess halls repeated with relish. It travels faster than grain and feeds empty pride the way bread feeds hunger. When the legions reach the gates, they arrive believing they carry home inside their standards. The city keeps counting. Scribal teams sweep storehouses one by one, chalking doors with sums and notes on damp. Navy records are checked against boards at the dockside. Crews are mustered and paid in fractions when chests run light. A queen signs receipts herself, knowing the signature will be evidence of order when she asks a conqueror for terms that keep a few lives intact. Candles burn low over lists of names. Antony's unravelling reaches the courtyard. False reports arrive like stage thunder. One says she is dead. He reads the line, believes it, and falls on his sword in a theatre whose roof will not shelter him from the weather of events. He is carried to her, wounded, and spends his last strength in a city whose voice is already changing tense. His passing closes one argument. It opens another that only she can finish. Cleopatra meets the end measured to the breath. She sets guards at doorways to keep zeal from spoiling decisions. She arranges what can still be arranged: burial, dress, and the last permissions that enter into ritual. Envoys move again under tighter watch. She tries once more to secure the children's future, to trade compliance for survival. The answer is a smooth denial wrapped in courtesy. Rome will be fed, and Egypt will be a fact within a larger fact. Octavian's arrival is precise. He audits the palace with his eyes, tallies furniture as though it were provinces, and keeps a boundary between respect and possession so thin you can hear it as silence between words. He offers life with conditions. He offers public display as proof of Rome's triumph. She understands the contract. To walk in a Roman parade is to empty the throne of meaning and fill a day in the capital with spectacle. A queen can submit. A sovereign cannot. Her decision forms without speeches. She chooses to die as a ruler rather than cross a city to the sound of other people's cheers. The method becomes a debate for later ages. The ASCP may be legend. Poison is plausible. She arranges the room. She wears state, not mourning. She lies down with a steadiness that belongs to ceremony, not to panic. When they find her, the measure is in the quiet, not the display. Agency at the edge of conquest is the only wealth left to spend. 9 days separate her death from Antony's. They are buried as she requested, a pairing that denies Rome a chapter in its pageant and grants Egypt one last act on its own terms. The city keeps working even as it yields. Ledgers close accounts that will never be paid. Priests complete rites that transfer care from one world to another. The final levy is collected in silence. This is the mini payoff. Method aside, the meaning holds. She refuses the parade that would close her story as someone else's entertainment. She chooses the moment and the framing, preserves the dignity of rule in the only way still available, and writes the last line in a hand that is her own. The banners fall. The province rises. Chapter 10. From Kingdom to Province. What changes when a crown is replaced by a seal stamped SPQR? You feel it in the cadence of orders. The accents in the palace shift. The door to the treasury opens to a different key. A queen's signature gives way to a Roman seal, and Egypt learns to breathe on imperial timing. Octavian moves fast, then tightens. He does not hand Egypt to the Senate. He holds it as a personal province, a possession he administers through a single chain. At the top stands an equestrian prefect, a knightly official who answers to him alone. No senator may govern here. No rival may turn grain into leverage. Authority flows downward without branches where ambition can nest. The prefect sits where the pharaoh sat in matters of tax and law. He measures the Nile, sets the dues, commands the garrisons, and audits the granaries. His orders carry the emperor's weight. He controls export licenses, shipping lanes, and the schedules that keep Rome's bread arriving on time. You can hear a new rhythm in the harbours as clerks count to Roman beats and pilots sail to Roman dates. Infrastructure persists. Warehouses remain where they were built. Canals run in the same beds. The lighthouse still marks the harbour mouth with its steady fire. Scribes who wrote for the Ptolemies now copy for Rome. They keep rolls of taxpayers, tallies of grain, dispute records, and temple accounts. Scripts change headers, not habits. The continuity cushions the shock, but autonomy shrinks. The priestly class adjusts to rulings issued in Latin outline and Greek detail. Temples receive allocations under Roman oversight, their processions funded by a state that counts spectacle as social order. City councils learn that petitions travel farther if they align with the prefect's plan. Governors from the nomes still walk in with ledgers, but the audience has new rules, and the last word belongs to a man who writes to one address in Italy. Egypt becomes a linchpin by design. Grain is not tribute, it is system. The prefect supervises planting estimates, harvest reports, storage capacity, and shipment timing. He assigns guards to canals in flood season and to depots in drought. He staggers convoys so hulls do not overload quays downstream. Rome is fed by schedule, not hope. The city on the Tiber sleeps better when the Nile's arithmetic holds. Direct oversight prevents interference. By keeping Egypt under the emperor's hand, Octavian bypasses senatorial competition. No noble house can corner the harvest or play rescuer in the forum with gift bread. The political heat that once boiled over in Roman streets cools when the supply moves without drama. Quiet logistics become public peace. At the quay, the change looks practical. Inspectors stamp cargo manifests that match inland ledgers. Millers receive quotas, not favours. Sailing windows open on a calendar aligned with military needs. The same ships that carry grain carry messages in the other direction. Prices, shortages, repairs. A loop forms between Alexandria and Rome, tight enough that delay reads as defiance and reliability reads as loyalty. The rupture is still real. The last of the Ptolemies lies beyond Roman reach, and with her, the line that tied Macedonian conquest to Egyptian sanctity dissolves. Coins lose a face that once argued legitimacy. Titles lose words that once traced descent to gods. In their place, an imperial vocabulary takes root. Egypt is no longer a sovereign court. It is an instrument in a larger orchestra. This ending is more than a dynastic close. It is the final cadence of the Hellenistic world. The age that began with Alexander's generals carving kingdoms out of empire now yields to a single centre. City-states shaded by monarchies give way to provinces disciplined by a princeps. Silk and papyrus still move through markets, but the authority above them is consolidated into one hand that refuses to share. Octavian rebrands the victory for audiences at home. He weaves Cleopatra into a cautionary tale, foreign allure, dangerous counsel, a queen who tested Roman resolve and lost to Roman measure. The framing turns conquest into duty fulfilled. It binds his rule to moral rescue rather than simple appetite. Crowds accept the story because the bread arrives while the tale is told. In the records, you can see the merger. Greek formulas survive in contracts. Egyptian religious terms still define festivals and sacred time. The prefect's chancery writes around them, not through them, combining imperial directives with local practice, so compliance feels familiar. The result is a hybrid that obeys Rome without abandoning the muscle memory that keeps Egypt functioning. Temples adapt. Their treasuries undergo inventory with stoic faces. Their calendars continue, now praised as guardians of civic order. In exchange for regular funding and legal recognition, they bless public stability, provide labor in canal seasons, and carry imperial names in prayers that speak of balance. Priest and prefect become partners in predictability. Local elites recalibrate. Families that served the Ptolemies serve the prefect, build homes along the same streets, and send sons to learn the same scripts. Advancement depends less on palace access and more on meeting targets that travel beyond Egypt. A governor who delivers clean figures gains extension. A tax farmer who keeps weights honest renews his contract. Rome rewards function. For the emperor, the gain is structural. Egypt's wealth underwrites projects and patronage. Its steady grain stabilizes politics that once hinged on accident and riot. The Principate, ruled by a first citizen who claims to restore the Republic, rests, in part, on the quiet of a province that answers directly to him. Control of Egypt becomes proof that his office is necessary. Think of it as a lock on a canal. Open it, and the empire flows. Close it, and the empire strains. Octavian builds the lock and keeps the key. No senator can jam it without confronting the man who stands at the center. No rival can promise the people food without his consent. Authority stops being a contest of speeches and becomes a system of deliveries. Alexandria adjusts without losing its pulse. The Marcion's echo thins, but study persists. Merchants reload habits and inventories to match imperial tariffs. Dockyards repair hulls that now sail under eagles. The lighthouse remains a constant, lighting a trade that serves a different master, but uses the same sea. Egypt's independence dies, but its importance to empire increases. It feeds more mouths, funds more works, and stabilizes more politics than it did under a crown. The seal stamped DSPQR rests on bills of lading and court decisions that travel farther than any Ptolemaic edict ever did. The machine keeps turning because the parts were built to last. The queen is gone, but her echo does not fade. Chapter 11. The Afterlife of a Name. Why does a ruler whose tomb we cannot find remain vividly present? Because absence creates a stage, and on it, competing versions of a single life rehearse for centuries without closing night. Cleopatra outlives herself in metal, in ink, and in theatre. Coins carry her profile around the Mediterranean, a portable proclamation of rank and right. Texts record her as rumour and as warning. Plays and later retellings dress her in fashions that please the moral tastes of their own eras. Each age makes a queen to match its reflection, then calls it history. The tension sits in the split screen that refuses to merge. Seductress or strategist. The face that toppled men or the mind that kept a country fed while civil wars burned across the sea. These images do not meet in the middle. They argue past each other. When you listen closely, you hear how the argument hides the simple, stubborn facts of administration and survival. We turn to the evidence base because we must. Portraits on coins give us a standardized image. Diadem, profile, features presented for recognition rather than flattery. They are official, which is to say curated, yet they were produced under her authority and circulated while the stakes were real. Texts, especially terse lines preserved by later writers, filter events through distance and agenda. Roman voices, writing after victory, colour the record with triumph and admonition. The ink dries around a verdict. Propaganda sharpened the edges. In the aftermath of defeat, her opponents cast her as a foreign influence that unmoored Roman virtue. The narrative travelled well. It gave the victors a frame that turned conquest into cure. Once a story like that settles into public memory, it recruits details that fit and sheds those that do not, until the person becomes a role. Even so, the material record presses back. Coins weigh in with continuity across mints, suggesting deliberate self-presentation rather than fantasy. Busts from her era, studied for diadem lines, hairstyle and profile, propose a recognizably human sovereign, rather than an ornament of legend. They remind us that portraiture in antiquity encoded ideals and status, not photographic detail, but still aimed to be legible to contemporaries who had seen the subject. Texts require harder handling. Terse accounts preserve sequences and motives as later readers understood them. They emphasize moral lessons that fit the audience. They also leave gaps where logistics should be. Between sentences about charm and downfall lie unspoken systems: tax ledgers, harbour rosters, priestly calendars that turned pageant into policy and kept the country attached to its river. The unanswered question that holds the popular imagination is her burial. Excavations at Taposiris Magna, west of Alexandria, have sought traces that might anchor the last chapter in ground rather than in rumour. The search continues because a tomb would offer context, artifacts, inscriptions, arrangement, capable of testing long-held stories against mute stone. Unresolved questions exert gravity. They keep the name in motion. But the counterweight to fascination rests in work she performed under pressure. Her legacy lies in policy and performance allied. She used multilingual leadership to cross the administrative divide that separated palace and countryside. She practiced symbolic statecraft that spoke fluently in ritual while negotiating in ledgers. She built coalitions that treated spectacle as a public memorandum of terms, not a distraction from them. Those choices held a kingdom together during famines and during wars that were not of its making. Modern scholarship has spent years rebalancing the profile. Researchers restore the administrator alongside the icon, placing financial decisions, harbour management, and temple relations in the foreground. They explain how a crown carried in two scripts could create consent and compliance through reliability rather than fear. They measure how logistics and timing, not rumour and romance, decided which allies remained and which fled. Think of empire as a theatre whose backstage is larger than its stage. The audience sees the scene, the costumes, the gestures. The power sits in carpenters, rope teams, and cue scripts. She knew the backstage and set cues that held even when the cast changed. Grain shipments are not stories. They are acts of rule. Evidence, thin as it is in places, continues to yield. Coins map messages sent into marketplaces. Busts and fragments point to a toolkit of signals, diadems, titles, divine associations that linked household rule to national order. Texts, pruned of their polemic, still trace the sequence of alliances and crises with enough clarity to see intent. Archaeological searches test memory against ground, and even when they do not find a tomb, they refine the map of her world. Her endurance in culture owes less to mystery than to usefulness. Different eras bend her into parable, warning, inspiration, scandal, ideal. The mask changes depending on who needs what lesson. Yet the underlying figure withstands because she fused intellect with image and produced results. Empire remembers what feeds it. Memory prefers heroes and villains, but archives reward competence. The distilled insight comes into focus. Power is often logistics draped in myth. The drape moves the crowd. The logistics keep the crowd alive long enough to be moved. She mastered both layers, treating ritual as contract and language as infrastructure. That is why the name refuses to recede into a line of dates. The mini payoff sits in that fusion. Cleopatra endures because she joined administrative clarity to symbolic fluency, because she engineered coalitions that traded pageantry for policy, and because systems she stabilized mattered to states that outlived her. The tomb may remain undiscovered, but her method is visible in the records that were too useful to discard. You walk out to the shoreline in your mind and see how the city never fully darkens. The lighthouse is gone, but the habit of light lingers in the word that once named it. We close the scroll. and the harbour lights of Alexandria still glow in memory. Conclusion and final thoughts. Her genius was simple and severe. She transformed culture into policy and spectacle into survival, holding a kingdom together until the tide of empire rose above any human design. We walked the ledges and the harbours, the rites and the war rooms, and saw how a crown can be infrastructure dressed for the stage. If this journey helped you see the politics beneath the legend, subscribe to Beyond the Ancient World and share. Tell me where in the world you're listening tonight. Leave this with you. Somewhere under Egyptian stone, a queen still keeps her silence. The questions do not tire. The harbour wind still moves, and the name still answers.